She was Claire Donovan, 32, a woman who had poured her heart into a dream that failed spectacularly, leaving her drowning in debt and doubt. When she stepped into the towering glass skyscraper in Chicago for a job interview she couldn't afford to miss, she never expected to collide with Grant Whitmore, 38, a tech billionaire with a reputation as cold and untouchable as the city skyline, yet hiding scars the tabloids would never reveal. From the very first glance, the air crackled between them, charged, electric, impossible to ignore. He was a man of power and secrets, she a woman still finding her strength after loss. And then one night, one fleeting touch, everything shifted. But could love survive ambition, past heartbreak, and the shadows of a world that would judge them both? Was she a choice or just another name in a list of fleeting affairs? Could trust survive when whispers, scandals, and fears of betrayal threatened to pull them apart before they even began? Join us as we follow Claire and Grant through temptation, heartbreak, and redemption. A story where passion meets vulnerability, and courage may be the only path to love. If you're ready to dive into this emotional journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss a single heartbeat of their story. I had always thought that by the time I turned 32, my life would feel settled, maybe not perfect, but at least steady. Instead, here I was, standing on the polished marble floor of a skyscraper in downtown Chicago, clutching my worn leather handbag as if it were a lifeline. 6 months earlier, I had watched my small design startup crumble like a sandcastle against a rising tide. The debts came fast, the investors faster, and when the dust settled, all I had left was a mountain of bills, a damaged credit score, and the gnawing fear that maybe I wasn't cut out for the dreams I had chased so recklessly. Now, survival was my new ambition. I needed a paycheck, not passion, something steady, respectable, that could dig me out of the hole I'd buried myself in. That was how I ended up here at Whitmore Innovations, the empire built by Grant Whitmore, a man whose name was splashed across business magazines and gossip columns with equal intensity. The lobby smelled faintly of fresh coffee and expensive cologne. The air hummed with quiet efficiency. Assistants in sleek suits gliding toward elevators, security guards nodding politely, the faint echo of heels against marble carrying upward to the glass ceiling. I pressed the elevator button and caught a glimpse of my reflection in the golden paneling, my chestnut hair tied neatly in a low bun, my navy dress, simple but professional, the small silver watch on my wrist, the one gift I hadn't pawned when things got tight. I looked composed, or at least I hoped so. When the doors slid open on the top floor, I stepped into a world I wasn't sure belonged to me. The penthouse suite of Whitmore Innovations didn't feel like an office. It felt like a fortress. Floor-to-ceiling windows stretched across two sides. The Chicago skyline spread out like a painting in shades of steel and glass. At the far end of the room, standing by a sleek black console table, was Grant Whitmore himself. I recognized him instantly, though I had never met him. It was impossible not to know his face, square jaw, sharp cheekbones, storm gray eyes that seemed to pierce through photographs as easily as they now pinned me in place. He was on the phone, his voice low and clipped. "I don't care what the article says," he growled, pacing slightly. "Fix it, spin it. I don't want to see her name next to mine again." There it was, the scandal I had read about just 2 nights ago, while scrolling through my cracked phone screen. Sabrina Cole, the glamorous model, had been his partner until 6 months ago. Their breakup had been ugly, the kind tabloids feasted on. Photos, leaked texts, endless speculation about who betrayed whom. I froze, caught between wanting to retreat and the fact that I had no choice. My heels clicked a little too loudly as I stepped forward, clutching the leather-bound planner I had bought secondhand to look the part of a competent assistant. Grant's head lifted, his eyes, steel, polished to a dangerous shine, landed on me. For the briefest moment, his expression softened, then hardened again, as if a curtain had dropped back into place. He slipped his phone into the pocket of his tailored suit, his voice shifting from thunder to cool precision. "You're early," he said. My throat tightened, but I forced a calm smile. I didn't want to keep you waiting. The air between us felt charged, like the moments before a storm when the sky holds its breath. He studied me, his gaze moving slowly, not crudely, but in a way that made me feel measured, weighed, assessed. "You'll find I don't like waiting," he said finally, his tone even, but laced with warning. I tightened my grip on the planner. "I'll keep that in mind. Mr. Whitmore." A corner of his mouth curved, not a smile, not really, but something close. "Call me Grant. If you're going to live in my house, formality is a waste of time." My stomach twisted. Live in his house. The job description had been clear enough: personal assistant, on call at all hours, lodging provided. But hearing it from his lips carried a weight I hadn't anticipated. "Yes, Grant," I said, the name catching in my throat like something forbidden. He gestured toward the hallway that led deeper into the penthouse. "Your room's down that way. Get settled. We'll start tomorrow." I nodded, but his eyes lingered on mine a moment longer, and I felt it: not a touch, not a word, but something that vibrated in the air between us. Electricity. That night, as I unpacked in the guest room, I replayed the moment again and again. The steel of his gaze, the quiet authority in his voice, the storm I glimpsed just behind the calm. I reminded myself that this was work, that I was here to rebuild, not to get entangled in a man whose life was splashed across headlines. But deep down, a part of me already knew nothing about Grant Whitmore would ever be simple. The first night in Grant Whitmore's penthouse felt like moving into a museum where I didn't quite belong. The space was beautiful, no question about its sleek lines, glass walls that stretched toward the sky, polished stone floors that reflected the evening lights of Chicago like a mirror. But beneath all that beauty, there was something cold. It was the kind of home that looked like it had been designed for photographs, not for people. No family pictures on the walls, no half-read books stacked on a nightstand. Just immaculate surfaces and silence. My room, though labeled guest suite, was larger than my entire apartment back in Lincoln Park. It had a king-size bed with crisp white linens, a walk-in closet I didn't need, and a view of the Chicago River winding its way through the city. Still, as I unpacked my modest belongings, 3 suitcases of clothes, a battered copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, and a framed photo of my parents, I felt like a trespasser. The first morning set the tone. At 6 sharp, I found a note slid under my door: coffee at 6:30, meeting prep at 7. "Don't be late. G." I made my way to the kitchen, an expanse of marble counters and stainless steel appliances that gleamed like they'd never been touched. Grant was already there, wearing a tailored suit, tie perfectly knotted, a French press half empty on the counter. He didn't look up when I entered, just gestured toward a mug. "You take it black?" he asked. I nodded, though truthfully I preferred mine with cream and sugar. "Yes." He glanced at me then, eyes sharp as ever, and for a split second, I thought I saw something soften, but just as quickly. The curtain dropped again. His days were regimented, almost military in their precision. Breakfast was quick, usually toast or a protein shake, consumed while he scrolled through financial reports on his tablet. Meetings filled the morning, calls the afternoon, dinners with investors or politicians in the evening. When he returned late at night, he often carried the faint smell of whiskey and the weight of a man who lived too many lives in one body. My job was to keep the chaos contained, arranging calls, filtering emails, adjusting his schedule minute by minute. I quickly learned that time was his most valued currency, and wasting it was the one unforgivable sin. Yet, for all his discipline, the penthouse told another story. I noticed it in the details. The piano in the living room, glossy black, clearly played but left untouched for weeks. The liquor cabinet stocked with expensive bottles, half of them unopened, the other half drained in quiet solitude. The balcony overlooking Lake Michigan, where I sometimes caught him standing alone, his hands in his pockets, staring at the dark water as if searching for something he'd lost. By the end of the first week, I began keeping a journal at night. It wasn't part of the job description, but it became my way of making sense of the man I now worked for and lived alongside. Day 3, I wrote, sitting cross-legged on the edge of my bed. Grant is efficient, exacting, and utterly unreachable. He speaks to me only when necessary. Yet I can't shake the feeling that his silence hides more than arrogance. There's something behind his eyes, something heavy. He doesn't smile, he doesn't laugh, but when he looks out over the city, it's like he's searching for a piece of himself out there. Day 6. Another entry read, he corrects me when I get details wrong, but never raises his voice. He isn't cruel, not in the way the tabloids paint him. Ruthless, yes. Distant, yes. But cruel. I don't think so. Maybe I'm fooling myself, but I see loneliness where others see coldness. It surprised me, that flicker of empathy. I had come here prepared to deal with a tyrant, a man who chewed through assistance the way most people went through batteries. But as the days stretched into nights, I found myself curious. There were moments, small but striking, that chipped away at the image of the untouchable billionaire, like the morning I caught him in the kitchen before dawn, sleeves rolled up, standing over a frying pan with a sheepish look. I burned the eggs, he admitted, his tone flat but not unfriendly. Maybe eggs aren't your specialty, I replied, and for the first time, I thought I saw the ghost of a smile, or the evening when he returned from a board meeting. Tie loosened, his expression drawn tight. He poured himself a glass of scotch, but instead of drinking, he set it down untouched and sat at the piano. The music that filled the room was haunting low, deliberate notes that spoke of longing and loss. I stayed in the hallway, unseen, and wrote about it later. Day 9. He plays like a man confessing sins no one else can hear. If the world saw this version of Grant Whitmore, they'd never call him ruthless again. Despite myself, I felt the lines blurring. I was here to work, to rebuild my own life, not to untangle his. But every day I lived in that penthouse, the walls seemed less like glass and steel and more like mirrors, reflecting back not just his solitude but my own. I told myself it was just observation, just professional curiosity. But when I closed my journal at night and turned off the lamp, I knew the truth. I was starting to feel something I couldn't yet name. By the end of the second week, I had grown used to the rhythm of Grant Whitmore's life: early mornings, endless meetings, late nights filled with silence. But it was in those late nights, when the city softened and the noise faded, that I began to see glimpses of something unexpected. The first time it happened, I had finished organizing a stack of contracts in the study. It was close to midnight, the penthouse quiet except for the faint hum of traffic far below. As I passed the living room, I saw him. Grant was standing near the window, his back straight but his shoulders heavy. One hand held a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid catching the city lights. The other was tucked into his pocket. His gaze was fixed on the skyline, but there was nothing triumphant in the way he looked at it. No pride, no satisfaction, only a stillness so profound it felt like grief. I froze, afraid to intrude. His profile, sharp against the backdrop of glass and neon, looked carved out of stone, but the eyes gray, steady. Unblinking were not the eyes of a conqueror. They were hollow, as if staring at the life he had built and wondering why it didn't feel like enough. I slipped away before he could notice me, retreating to my room with a strange weight in my chest. That night, I wrote in my journal, Day 14. He looked out at the city as if it were a painting he no longer recognized. The man the world calls ruthless looked lost. I don't know why it unsettled me so much. Maybe because I recognized that same emptiness in myself after my company failed. Maybe loneliness has a way of being familiar, no matter how different our lives look on the surface. From then on, I couldn't unsee it. In the mornings, he was all precision demanding, efficient, quick with criticism if I slipped. But in the evenings, after the meetings ended and the ties were loosened, I saw the cracks, like the night I found him asleep at his desk, head resting against a stack of papers, the screen of his laptop still glowing. The untouched glass of water beside him had collected condensation, a small pool forming on the polished wood. His breathing was steady, but his hand still clutched a pen as though he couldn't let go, even in sleep. I stood there longer than I should have, watching, thinking about how exhaustion could strip a man of his armor more effectively than any scandal ever could. Eventually, I draped a blanket over his shoulders and slipped away. He never mentioned it the next day, but I noticed the faintest nod of acknowledgement when he saw me. Another evening, after an especially brutal call with the board, he emerged from his office with a bottle of scotch instead of a glass. He poured generously, then settled into the armchair near the window. The lights of Chicago stretched endlessly, glittering like stars, but his eyes weren't on them. "Do you ever wonder," he said suddenly, his voice low, "why people fight so hard for things that only make them miserable?" The question startled me. He wasn't talking to me. Not really. It was more like he was speaking into the air, letting the words escape because they were too heavy to hold inside. "Still," I answered, maybe because it's easier than admitting they don't know what will actually make them happy. He turned his head then, his eyes locking onto mine. There was no mask in that moment, no cold calculation. Just a flicker of recognition, as if I had spoken something he hadn't expected to hear from anyone, least of all, me. The silence stretched, thick and fragile, until he finally looked away. He downed the rest of his drink and muttered, "Get some rest. Claire, tomorrow will be worse." But that night, I couldn't rest. His question lingered like smoke, curling around my thoughts. Why did people chase things that made them miserable? Why did I thought about my failed startup, about the long nights of chasing investors, the constant hunger to prove myself, the shame of watching it all collapse. I had wanted success so badly that I ignored the exhaustion, the loneliness, the creeping knowledge that I didn't even love what I was building anymore. And when it all fell apart, I was left with nothing but debt and disappointment. Now, working for Grant, I wondered if his empire felt the same way to him, a towering success story that no longer felt like his own. By the end of the third week, I found myself watching him differently, not as my boss, not as the billionaire the tabloids painted him to be, but as a man who carried the weight of his choices like armor. And I began to realize that maybe, just maybe, the armor wasn't as impenetrable as it seemed. The strange thing about living in the same space as your boss is how the boundaries blur, even when you try to keep them sharp. Days slid into one another, meetings stacked neatly like dominoes. And still, there were moments small, fleeting, that made me forget we were supposed to be just employer and employee. It began with the smallest gestures. One morning, I passed him a file just as he reached for it. Our fingers brushed, barely a second of contact, but enough for me to feel the warmth of his skin, the steadiness of his hand. He didn't flinch, didn't apologize. He just took the folder, his eyes lingering a fraction too long before dropping back to the page. I told myself it meant nothing, but the echo of that touch stayed with me all day. Another time, in the back of a town car on the way to a dinner meeting, the driver braked too hard. I lost my balance, and before I could steady myself, Grant's hand was there, firm against my arm. The contact was protective, instinctive, but when he let go, I noticed the way his jaw tightened as if he had broken his own rule. I stared out the window, pretending the city lights had captured my full attention. But my pulse was betraying me, quick and loud. It was easy to dismiss these things in daylight. Easier still when I had 1,000 tasks to distract me. But at night, when the penthouse fell silent and the city hummed faintly below, those little moments gathered in my mind like pebbles in a jar, each one making the silence heavier. And then came the piano. I hadn't heard it in weeks. The glossy black grand sat in the corner of the living room like a sculpture, beautiful, untouchable, and strangely sad. But one night, unable to sleep, I wandered into the hallway with a glass of water in my hand. That was when I heard it, the soft, deliberate notes of a melody that seemed to rise from the shadows themselves. I froze, leaning lightly against the wall, afraid to intrude. Grant sat at the piano, his sleeves rolled to the elbows, the city's glow spilling across his shoulders. His fingers moved over the keys with a kind of reverence, coaxing out a sound that was both fragile and powerful, like confession turned into music. The song wasn't one I recognized. It didn't sound like anything written for the stage or recorded in a studio. It was raw, unpolished, and heartbreakingly personal. I should have turned back. This was private, a side of him he had never invited me to see. But I couldn't move. My breath caught, my glass of water trembling in my hand, as I watched a man the world called ruthless reveal himself through the only language that seemed honest to him. He played for several minutes, lost in the music, his eyes closed, as if the world beyond the piano didn't exist. And then, just as suddenly, he stopped. You always stand in doorways. His voice was quiet, low, but it carried across the room. Heat rushed to my cheeks. I stepped forward, setting the glass on the nearest table. I didn't mean to interrupt. I just couldn't sleep. He didn't look at me right away. His gaze lingered on the keys, his fingers resting lightly on them, as though reluctant to let go. Finally, he glanced up, gray eyes catching mine in the dim light. "Most people don't think of me as the type to play piano," he said. I hesitated, then shook my head. "Most people don't see you at all. They see headlines, numbers, whatever makes the story easier to tell. But this," I gestured toward the instrument, "this is different." Something flickered in his expression, something almost vulnerable. He pressed a single note, let it hang in the air, then stood, slipping back into the armor I knew too well. "Get some rest, Claire. Tomorrow's going to be long." I nodded, but as I walked back to my room, the melody followed me, haunting and tender. Later, I wrote in my journal, Day 18. He plays like a man trying to remember what it feels like to be alive. Tonight, I saw a part of him no one else sees. And now, I don't know what to do with that knowledge. I told myself I came here to rebuild my own life. But the more I learn about Grant, the more I feel that we're both rebuilding just in different ways. As I closed the journal and lay in bed, I realized something had shifted. The penthouse didn't feel quite as cold anymore, and maybe that was more dangerous than the silence ever had been. The storm rolled in just after midnight, sweeping across Chicago with a violence that rattled the glass walls of the penthouse. From my room, I could hear the wind howling, the rain pelting against the windows like handfuls of gravel. I lay awake, restless, until the power flickered once, then went out altogether. Silence followed, thick and heavy, broken only by the steady hum of the city below. Chicago's lights still burned, but inside the penthouse, the darkness felt alive. I slipped out of bed, clutching the edge of the towel I'd wrapped around myself after a late shower. My plan was simple: make it back to my room with a glass of water and wait for the storm to pass. But the universe had other plans. I turned the corner into the main hallway and stopped dead. Grant was there. He stood near the end of the corridor, silhouetted against the glow of the city pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows. He wore a black dress shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows, collar open. In one hand, he held a glass of amber liquid, the ice long since melted. His gaze lifted slowly, locking onto me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us felt charged, thick with the same electricity that crackled in the storm outside. "Claire." His voice was low, rough, as if the storm had settled in his chest. I swallowed hard, gripping the edge of the towel tighter. My skin was still damp from the shower, and suddenly, every drop of water felt like fire under his gaze. "I didn't know you were still awake," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. His eyes didn't leave mine, but I felt them everywhere on the curve of my shoulder, the damp strands of my hair, the bare skin I hadn't meant for him to see. He took a slow step closer, the sound of his shoes soft against the hardwood. "I could say the same," he murmured. "You should be in bed. I should have retreated, should have offered some polite excuse and disappeared into the safety of my room." But my feet refused to move. My heart hammered so loudly I wondered if he could hear it. The storm outside cracked with thunder, a flash of lightning illuminating the hallway. In that split second, I saw him clearly, the tension in his jaw, the storm-dark shadows in his eyes, the way his hand tightened around the glass as if holding himself back. He stopped just a foot away, close enough that I caught the faint scent of sandalwood and whiskey, close enough that the heat from his body seemed to pull me toward him. "You're not afraid of me," he said suddenly. Not a question, a statement. "I'm not most people," I answered before I could think. His lips curved not into a smile, but something darker, sharper. He set his glass on the narrow console table beside us with a sharp clink. My eyes fell briefly to the objects there. My leather-bound planner, neat and orderly, resting beside his keys on a sleek metal keychain shaped like a bullet, control and chaos, side by side. His gaze returned to mine. "You shouldn't look at me like that." "Like what?" My voice trembled, but I didn't look away. "Like you're daring me to cross a line." His words were low, his breath brushing my cheek. The air felt thick, unbreathable. Every inch of me hummed with awareness, the towel clinging to my skin, the storm rattling against the glass, the impossible nearness of him. I wanted to step back, but my body leaned forward instead, drawn to the gravity of him. "Maybe I am," I whispered. For a heartbeat, the world stopped. The thunder outside faded, the city lights dimmed, and it was just us two people standing on the edge of something reckless. His hand lifted, hesitated, then brushed the edge of the towel where it met my collarbone. He didn't pull, didn't push, just hovered there, close enough to make my breath catch. "Tell me to stop," he said, his voice raw, urgent. I opened my mouth, but no words came. My throat was tight, my pulse frantic, my will caught in a tug of war between fear and longing. Instead of retreating, I lifted my chin and held his gaze. The silence stretched, electric, unbearable. And then a chime, the sharp buzz of his phone vibrating against the console table. The sound shattered the moment like glass breaking. Grant stiffened, his hand dropping away, the heat of his touch replaced by a chill. He reached for the phone, his jaw tightening as he glanced at the screen. Whatever he saw darkened his expression, shutters slamming down over the storm I had just glimpsed. "You should get some rest," he said, his voice clipped now, distant. "Tomorrow will be a long day." I nodded, though my knees felt weak. "Good night." "Grant." I turned toward my room, the hardwood cold under my bare feet. Behind me, I could hear the faint sound of him exhaling, a sound too heavy to be relief, too soft to be anger. Back in my room, I leaned against the closed door, my heart still racing, my skin still humming with the echo of his nearness. Tonight. The storm had raged outside, but the real tempest had been here in the hallway, in the silence, in the almost touch that left me more unsettled than any lightning ever could. The storm didn't let up the next evening. Rain still streaked across the windows, the sky a restless churn of gray and silver. Inside, the penthouse felt smaller than usual, as if the walls had drawn closer, pressing us together whether we liked it or not. I had spent the day avoiding his eyes, throwing myself into schedules, conference calls, and emails, but avoidance only sharpened the tension. Every time he passed me a file, every time I heard his voice on the phone, the memory of the hallway returned the weight of his nearness, the heat of his hand, the words he hadn't spoken. By nightfall, I couldn't concentrate. I wandered into the kitchen, barefoot, wearing a thin cardigan over my sleep shirt. The city outside was muted by clouds, its lights blurred into smears of gold and white. I poured myself a glass of water, but before I could retreat, I heard his footsteps. Couldn't sleep. His voice came from behind me, softer than usual. I turned. Grant stood in the doorway, his tie gone, the top buttons of his shirt undone. His hair was slightly mussed, his expression unreadable. "The storm," I said quickly, too loud. He stepped farther into the kitchen, and suddenly the air felt warmer. "It has a way of making everything harder to ignore," he murmured. I wasn't sure if he meant the storm or something else. We stood there in silence, the hum of the refrigerator and the drumming rain filling the space between us. He set his glass on the counter, then leaned against it, watching me. His eyes were darker tonight, storm gray with something I couldn't quite name. "Claire," he said finally, my name breaking the stillness. "I've tried to keep this professional, to keep you at a distance." My breath caught. "You don't need to explain." But he shook his head. "I do. Because every time I tell myself to stop, I find myself here again. With you." The world tilted. The glass trembled in my hand. Before I could answer, he stepped closer, close enough that I felt the heat of him, close enough that my pulse stumbled. "Tell me to stop," he said, just as he had in the hallway. But this time, his voice wasn't sharp. It was quiet, raw, like a man confessing a weakness. I should have. I knew all the reasons. He was my boss. His life was a battlefield of scandals and headlines. My own heart was still fragile, still healing from failure. Nothing about this made sense, and yet I didn't tell him to stop. Instead, I whispered, "Don't." That was all it took. He closed the space between us in one breath, his lips on mine, fierce and unguarded. The glass in my hand slipped onto the counter with a soft thud as his arms pulled me closer. The kiss was hungry, desperate, but beneath the fire was something gentler, a plea I could feel in the way his fingers brushed against my jaw, the way he held me as if he were afraid I might vanish. I melted into him, my hands gripping the fabric of his shirt, anchoring myself in the storm of him. The rain pounded harder against the windows, thunder rolling through the sky. But here, in his arms, all I heard was the rush of my own heartbeat. He lifted me, carried me to the couch, and laid me down with a tenderness that caught me off guard. The world outside roared, but here it was, quiet, every touch deliberate, every kiss slower now, as if he wanted to memorize me. I lost track of time. It might have been minutes, it might have been hours, but when the storm finally softened to a gentle patter, we were tangled together in silence. His forehead rested against mine, his breath uneven, his hands framing my face like I was something fragile and irreplaceable. "Claire," he whispered, my name breaking like glass on his lips. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat was tight, my mind spinning. I kissed him softly instead, the kind of kiss that wasn't about hunger, but about recognition, an acknowledgement of something neither of us could ignore any longer. Later, when the storm had passed and the city was calm again, I lay awake beside him. His arm was draped over me, his breath warm against my hair. The rise and fall of his chest should have comforted me, but my thoughts churned. Was this love, or was it a mistake dressed up in moonlight and thunder in the darkness? I stared at the ceiling, knowing only one thing for certain, whatever it was. Nothing between us would ever be the same. The morning after the storm, the penthouse felt different, warmer, somehow, though nothing had changed. The same glass walls, the same marble floors, the same city sprawling beyond the windows. And yet, when I woke wrapped in Grant's shirt, the fabric still smelling faintly of sandalwood, I felt as if I had stepped into another life. We didn't talk about it, not at breakfast, not during the day's meetings, not in the car on the way back from a dinner with investors. He treated me with the same clipped professionalism, his voice steady, his demands precise. If anything, he seemed more disciplined, as if doubling down on control could erase the memory of the night before. But control has limits. It was late evening when the intercom buzzed, its sharp tone cutting through the quiet. I was in the study, sorting through a stack of contracts, when I heard his voice from the living room. "Who is it?" His tone was sharper than usual, impatient. The reply came crackling through the speaker, low and sultry, dripping with familiarity. "Grant, it's me. Let me up." My stomach twisted. I didn't need to see her face to know who it was. Sabrina Cole. I had seen her on magazine covers, red carpets, social media posts that seemed to glitter with perfection. Tall, blonde, The kind of woman whose smile could launch a brand campaign, and the kind of woman whose breakup with Grant had fed the tabloids for months. I froze, listening. There was silence, then the buzz of the door unlocking. My chest tightened as I heard the elevator hum, then the faint ding as it opened into the penthouse. 5 minutes? Sabrina. Grant's voice was clipped, controlled, that's all. Her heels clicked against the marble like a metronome, each step precise, deliberate. I stayed in the study doorway, half hidden in the shadows, unwilling to announce myself, but unable to walk away. When she spoke, her voice carried through the space, rich and practiced. "You look good, Grant. Better than the last time I saw you? What do you want?" Sabrina. His tone was ice. "I miss you." The words were simple, but the way she said them was anything but. A soft sigh, a rustle of fabric, as if she had stepped closer. We were good together. You know that. I clenched my fists, my nails biting into my palms. Grant's reply was low, measured. "We were never good. You wanted my name, my money, not me. That's not true." Her voice cracked, slipping from confidence to something almost pleading. "I loved you, Grant. I still do. Give me another chance." The silence that followed was deafening. I pressed myself against the wall, my breath shallow. I shouldn't have been listening, but the words rooted me to the spot. Was I a replacement? A distraction from the woman he had lost. Finally, his answer came, sharp and final. "Get out. We're done." There was a gasp, then the sharp click of her heels retreating. The elevator chimed again, the sound of her departure echoing in the stillness she left behind. I exhaled slowly, my chest tight. Relief should have come, but it didn't. Instead, there was only doubt. I stepped back into the study, pretending to shuffle papers, but when Grant appeared in the doorway, his expression was hard, unreadable. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice neutral. "Finishing these," I said quickly, holding up the contracts. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. He nodded once, then turned away without another word. But later, alone in my room, the questions circled. I wrote in my journal with a trembling hand. Day 22. She came back, Sabrina. The woman who broke him, he sent her away, but her presence lingers. I can't stop wondering if I'm just filling the void she left behind. Am I a choice or a mistake? The storm outside had passed, but inside me, a new one had begun. The morning after Sabrina's visit, the penthouse felt heavier. It wasn't the silence I had grown used to that, but something else. Something brittle that made every word, every glance, feel sharper. I tried to bury myself in work, but distraction has its limits. My phone buzzed just as I was finishing his calendar for the week. An unknown number. I hesitated before opening it. Just one message. "You're not the first secretary he's taken to bed." The words blurred on the screen as my heart lurched. My first instinct was denial, spam, gossip, someone's cruel idea of a joke. But then the image of Sabrina's face flashed in my mind, her voice dripping with confidence as she told him they'd been good together. My stomach twisted. I locked the phone, tossed it onto the desk, and pressed my palms into my eyes. It was nothing. It had to be nothing. But the words burned, echoing louder with every breath. For hours. I debated telling him, marching into his office, showing him the message, demanding an explanation. But what if it was true? What if I wasn't different? What if I was just one more name on a list? One more woman drawn in by the illusion of being chosen. That night, I wrote in my journal with a shaking hand. Day 23, an anonymous message. Just words on a screen, but words that cut deeper than they should. Am I a fool to believe him, to think I matter in a world where women like Sabrina exist? My heart says trust him. My mind says run. I couldn't look at him the same way after that. When he called for files, I delivered them quickly, eyes fixed on the paper, not on him. When we sat side by side in the car, I turned toward the window, the city blurring past like a defense. Even in the penthouse, where silence had once felt charged with possibility, it now felt suffocating. He noticed. One evening, as I was leaving the study, he stopped me. "Claire," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "You've been avoiding me." I forced a smile. "I've just been busy." Busy. His gray eyes searched mine, sharp and unrelenting, or something else. My throat tightened. I wanted to tell him, wanted to spill the truth and watch his face as he denied it or confirmed it. But fear held me still. Instead, I muttered, "It's nothing," and slipped away before he could press further. In the solitude of my room, I berated myself. I had survived failure, debt, humiliation. Why was I now paralyzed by a single text message? Because, whispered the part of me I tried hardest to silence, I cared. I cared more than I wanted to admit. The days stretched taut, each one more strained than the last. We spoke only when necessary. His questions were clipped, my answers shorter still. He studied me sometimes, a flicker of frustration in his eyes. But he didn't push. He was a man used to walls, maybe even grateful when others built their own. One night, I passed the living room and saw him at the window again, glass in hand, staring out at the city. His reflection in the glass looked like a stranger, lonely, unmoored. A part of me wanted to cross the room, to tell him about the message, to trust him with the doubt that gnawed at me, but I couldn't. Instead, I turned away, my footsteps silent on the floor, the distance between us growing wider with every step. The tension had been simmering for days, but when the explosion came, it was colder, sharper than I had imagined. It was a Sunday morning when the elevator doors slid open and Grant stepped into the penthouse, his expression carved from stone. He had been gone all night, summoned to a sudden emergency meeting. I had waited, pacing the living room until dawn, but now that he was here, the sight of him only made my heart pound harder. He carried a folder in his hand, its edges bent as if gripped too tightly. Without a word, he set it on the marble counter. "Claire," he said finally, his voice flat, distant. "We need to talk." My stomach dropped. "What is it?" He opened the folder. Inside were photographs, grainy but clear enough. Me and Grant in the hallway, too close, his hand on my arm. Another shot from the stormy night, the faint outline of us through the glass. Private moments turned into evidence. I felt the blood drain from my face. "Who took these?" "It doesn't matter," he said tightly. "What matters is the board has them. They know." I shook my head, refusing to believe it. "Grant, we haven't." I stopped, realizing how useless the protest was. We had. And even if we hadn't, the photographs told their own story. "They're threatening legal action," he continued, his jaw tight, "against me, against you. They're citing the non-fraternization clause in your contract. In mine, it's ironclad." The words landed like blows. My throat tightened. "So, what happens now?" He hesitated, just for a second. His mask slipped, and I saw at the raw pain behind his eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by cold resolve. "You're fired." The words shattered the air. For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. "You can't be serious." "I am." His voice cracked, just slightly, but he forced it steady. "If you stay, they'll destroy you. The media will drag your name through every headline. They'll dig into your past, your debt, your failures. I won't let that happen. Protect me." My voice rose, sharp and breaking. "Grant, you're not protecting me. You're throwing me out. You're choosing them over me. I'm choosing you," he snapped, and for the first time, his control cracked, his eyes burned, his breath uneven. "Don't you see? If I fight this, you'll be the one they tear apart. I can take it. You can't." Tears blurred my vision. "You don't get to decide that for me." My voice trembled, but the anger beneath it was real. "I trusted you. I gave you everything. And now, you're done with me." He flinched, as if the words had cut deeper than the photographs ever could. But he didn't move closer. He didn't reach for me. "Pack your things," he said, his voice cold again. A car will take you wherever you need to go. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The silence between us was unbearable, filled with everything we wanted to say but couldn't. Finally, I turned, grabbing my bag with shaking hands. At the elevator, I looked back. He stood near the window, his silhouette rigid, his hands clenched at his sides. He didn't turn, didn't speak, didn't stop me. The doors closed with a soft thud that felt like the end of everything. As the elevator descended, tears spilled freely, hot and relentless. By the time I stepped into the waiting car, I felt hollow, like something vital had been carved out of me. The city blurred past in streaks of rain and light. I pressed my forehead to the glass, the ache in my chest unbearable. I had thought I was his. I had thought we were something more than rumors and scandals. But I was wrong. I was just another mistake he couldn't afford. 6 months had passed since I left Chicago, but sometimes it felt like I was still trapped in that elevator, the doors sliding shut on everything I thought I had with Grant Whitmore. My new life was quieter, smaller, the kind of life people dreamed about when they wanted to escape the noise of the city. I had rented a weathered cottage on the coast of Maine, its gray shingles faded by salt and sun. The Atlantic stretched wide and endless just beyond my front porch, the sound of the waves a constant companion. My days were filled with words instead of schedules. I wrote freelance pieces for magazines, crafted copy for small businesses, even edited manuscripts for writers I would never meet. It didn't pay much, but it was enough to cover rent, enough to chip away at the debt I still carried like a scar, enough to keep me from sinking. The mornings were my favorite. I would brew coffee in a chipped ceramic pot, pull on an oversized sweater, and sit by the window as the sun rose over the water. The gulls cried overhead, the tide rolled in, and for a little while, I almost believed I was free. But memory is a tide of its own, relentless and uninvited. It came in the quiet moments, when I was painting at night with cheap acrylics, trying to capture the restless gray of the sea. It came when I walked the beach alone, the sand cool beneath my feet, the wind tugging at my hair. It came when I sat at my desk, staring at a blank page, and suddenly heard his voice in my mind low, steady, commanding. Grant Whitmore was everywhere and nowhere. I hated him for firing me, for deciding my fate without asking me, for loving me enough to destroy me, or maybe not loving me enough to fight for me. And I missed him. I missed the way his eyes softened in rare, unguarded moments. I missed the sound of his piano, the raw, haunting beauty of it. I missed the storm of him, even when it left me breathless and afraid. Most of all, I missed the version of myself I had been with him, the woman who felt seen, who felt alive. The contradiction gnawed at me. Some nights, I curled up on the couch, clutching a blanket around me, whispering his name like a wound I couldn't stop touching. Other nights, I cursed him, throwing the name away like broken glass. My journal became both confession and battlefield. Day 167. I wrote one evening, I thought leaving would make me stronger. I thought distance would dull the ache. But strength feels hollow when all I want is to hear his voice again. How can I hate him and miss him in the same breath? The people in town knew me as the quiet woman who rented the cottage. They waved when I bought groceries, nodded when I ordered coffee, invited me once or twice to community events. But I kept my distance. They didn't know about Chicago, or about him. They didn't know that I had once lived in a glass tower above the city, or that I had loved a man the world called ruthless. Maybe they thought I had always belonged here, in this quiet place by the sea. But I knew the truth. This was exile. And yet, there were moments of peace. One afternoon, I sat on the porch painting the horizon, the sea and sky melting into one another in shades of blue and gray. The brush slipped in my hand, leaving an unintended streak of gold across the canvas. For a moment, I considered painting over it, but then I left it, because the truth was, even in exile, even in all this gray, there was still a streak of him in me, a flash of gold I couldn't erase. As the waves crashed below and the gulls cried above, I whispered to the wind, "Grant," and I wondered if somewhere, in another city, under another storm, He whispered my name too. It was a crisp October afternoon when the package arrived. The mail in our little coastal town was always late, delivered by a retired fisherman named Walter, who drove his truck slower than the tide came in. I usually met him at the end of the gravel path, signed for whatever bills or magazines had found their way north, and went about my day. But that afternoon, he handed me a sleek black envelope, heavier than anything I'd received in months. No return address. Just my name, Claire Donovan, embossed in silver. I stood on the porch, the sea wind tugging at my sweater, the envelope cold in my hand. Inside was a single card, thick and smooth, its edges trimmed in gold. You are invited to an exclusive art exhibition, New York City, The Woman Who Changed Me. I read it once, twice, 3 times. My hands trembled. The title alone was enough to steal my breath. The Woman Who Changed Me. It couldn't be. And yet, deep down, I knew. Grant. I set the card on the weathered porch railing and stepped back as if it might burn me. The ocean roared in the distance, steady and relentless. But inside me, everything spun. For 6 months. I had built a life out of absence. I had taught myself how to make coffee without hearing his voice, how to walk the beach without imagining his hand in mine, how to sleep in silence without dreaming of his piano. And now, one card threatened to unravel all of it. I carried it inside, setting it on the wooden kitchen table, scarred from years of use. I stared at it while I brewed coffee, while I folded laundry, while I painted the restless sky. But no matter what I did, my gaze returned to it, as if the card had gravity. That night, I sat with my journal open, pen poised above the page, and wrote, Day 182, he found me. Or maybe he never stopped looking. The invitation is real, but what it means I don't know. Am I the woman who changed him, or just a story he tells himself when the nights get too long? If I go, I open every wound. If I stay, I'll never know. I closed the journal, but the question wouldn't close with it. The days that followed were worse. Every morning, I woke with the invitation still on the table, its words echoing louder than the waves outside. Every night, I argued with myself, pacing the small cottage until the floorboards creaked. Don't go, I told myself. You've rebuilt too much to fall apart again. You know how this story ends. He chooses power, reputation, survival, not you. But another voice whispered back, softer but stronger. What if you're wrong? What if he meant it? What if he built this entire exhibit for you? Would you walk away without seeing it? The townspeople noticed my distraction. At the cafe, when Mrs. Harlan asked about my latest article, I smiled too brightly and gave an answer I couldn't remember. At the market, Walter raised an eyebrow and I forgot to take my change. Even the sea seemed to watch me with restless eyes, as if urging me toward a decision. On the 4th night, I carried the invitation to the porch and held it against the wind. For a moment, I thought about letting it go, watching the tide carry it away, erasing the choice entirely. My fingers loosened, but I couldn't, because the truth was, no matter how much I hated him, no matter how much I had tried to move on, a part of me still belonged to him. And if this was his confession, his truth laid bare on canvas and frame, I needed to see it. I pressed the invitation to my chest, my heart pounding against the card. The next morning, I booked a train ticket to New York. New York smelled different than I remembered, sharper, faster, a city that didn't care who you were or what you carried in your heart. As the cab wound through Soho's narrow streets, I pressed my palms against my knees to still their trembling. 6 months away, and yet one envelope had pulled me back into the orbit I had sworn to escape. The gallery was small, tucked between boutiques and cafes, its front unmarked except for a brass plate engraved with a single word, her. Inside, the light was low, warm against white walls. The hum of conversation floated around me, patrons in black coats and polished shoes murmuring as they studied the art. I stepped past them, my breath shallow, and then I saw the first piece. It was me, not a photograph, not exactly, a sketch, charcoal on canvas. My profile, head tilted slightly, eyes turned not toward the artist, but toward something unseen. The lines were delicate, reverent, capturing the quiet curve of my neck, the loose strands of hair I never managed to tame. My chest tightened. I moved to the next work, a photograph this time. I was leaning against the piano in Grant's living room, my cardigan slipping off one shoulder, caught in a moment I hadn't known anyone was watching. The city lights glowed behind me, and in the picture, I looked unguarded, vulnerable, alive. Tears pricked my eyes. Piece by piece, wall by wall, I followed the story. A painting of my hands wrapped around a coffee mug, steam curling into the air. A photograph of me laughing at something unseen. My eyes bright in a way I hadn't felt in months. A sketch of me sitting cross-legged with a notebook, my brow furrowed in concentration. Each piece was me not polished, not posed, but real, raw. The way I had looked in moments when I thought no one noticed. The gallery blurred as tears spilled hot down my cheeks. I pressed a trembling hand to my mouth to keep from sobbing aloud. This wasn't just art, it was confession. Every stroke, every shadow, every frame whispered the truth Grant had seen me. Not the efficient assistant, not the convenient distraction, not even the woman who left. Me, the woman who laughed too loudly, who painted late at night, who stared at the sea as if searching for answers. And in seeing me, he had kept me. I reached the final canvas in the center of the room. It was larger than the others, its gold frame gleaming under the lights. My breath caught when I saw it. I was lying on the couch in his penthouse, wearing his black shirt, morning light spilling over me. My hair was tousled, my lips parted slightly as if I had just spoken his name. It was intimate, vulnerable in a way that made my knees weaken. At the bottom of the frame was a small card with a single word, her. No explanation, no context, just the truth, raw and unguarded. The dam inside me broke. I pressed both hands to my face, sobbing quietly, the weight of months of exile crashing down at once. He hadn't forgotten, he hadn't replaced me, he had built an entire world of color and shadow around me, and now he was letting the world see it. For the first time since I left Chicago, I didn't feel discarded. I felt chosen. A soft voice broke through my tears. He's been working on this for months. I turned. A woman stood beside me, older, elegant, a curator's badge clipped to her jacket. Her expression was kind, her eyes gentle. He wouldn't let anyone see it until tonight, she said. My voice shook. Grant. She nodded. He said it was for someone who changed him, someone he lost. I swallowed hard, my vision blurring again. My hand brushed the edge of the canvas, fingertips grazing the paint as if I could touch the memory itself. Grant still loved me. He always had. And now, I had to decide what to do with that truth. The curator's words still echoed in my mind when she slipped a small card into my hand. An address, no explanation, just a simple instruction. He wanted you to have this. The cab ride was a blur, streetlights smeared into gold streaks on the windows, horns blared, the city pressed in on every side. My fingers clenched the card so tightly that the edges bent, the ink smudging beneath the sweat of my palms. When the driver pulled up to an unmarked building near the Hudson, I almost told him to keep going. Almost. But something inside me, some pull stronger than fear, forced me out of the car and up the narrow stairwell. At the top, a door swung open to the night air. The rooftop stretched wide, strung with dim lights that swayed gently in the autumn wind. Beyond the edge, the city glittered, restless and endless. And there he was. Grant stood near the railing, his back to me, his coat pulled tight against the chill. Even from a distance, I could see the changes. He was thinner, his posture heavier, as if the months had carved pieces out of him. His hands gripped the railing, knuckles pale, and when he finally turned, my heart stopped. The same gray eyes, but dimmer now. Not sharp steel, but dulled, clouded, like a storm that had never ended. Claire. My name on his lips was both a prayer and a wound. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. You came, he said, as if he had been holding his breath for this moment. I wasn't sure I would, I admitted. He gave a faint, humorless smile. Neither was I. For a long moment, silence stretched between us, filled only by the hum of the city below. My chest ached with the weight of everything unsaid. Finally, I stepped closer. The gallery, I whispered. It was all me. Yes. His voice cracked, raw and unguarded. Every piece, every night you were gone, I painted, sketched, photographed anything to hold on to you. I didn't know how else to survive. Tears stung my eyes, but anger flared just as quickly. You let me go. Grant, you fired me. You left me with nothing. He flinched as if struck. I know. His voice rose, desperate, and I regret it every single day. I thought I was protecting you. Claire, the board, the press, they would have destroyed you. I couldn't watch that happen. My hands trembled. So instead, you destroyed me yourself. His jaw tightened. He stepped closer, his eyes burning. I was a coward. I thought if I cut you out, it would hurt less than watching them drag you through the fire. I thought I could bear the weight alone. But I was wrong. The wind whipped between us, tugging at my hair, carrying his words like smoke. You don't know what those months were like, he continued, his voice breaking. Every room empty without you. Every night I sat at the piano, hearing your laugh in the silence. Every painting, every sketch, it was all I had left of you. I tried to move on, but I couldn't. I don't want to. My chest tightened, torn between fury and longing. I wanted to scream at him, to hit him, to kiss him. Instead, my voice came out as a whisper. How do I know this isn't just another mistake, another storm that will break me? He stepped closer still, close enough that I could see the lines etched deeper into his face, the exhaustion in his eyes. Because this time, I'm not running. I'm not hiding behind contracts or scandals. I love you, Claire. I always did. And I will spend the rest of my life proving it, if you let me. Tears spilled hot down my cheeks. I hated him for making me doubt. I hated myself for still loving him through the doubt. You hurt me, I said, my voice trembling. I know. His own eyes glistened, and I'll carry that shame forever. But I can't lose you again. Not when I finally understand that the only thing worth fighting for, the only thing that ever mattered is you. The city roared beneath us, lights flashing, horns blaring, but up here, the world narrowed to the space between us. My heart thundered, torn wide open. I don't know if I can trust you again, I whispered. Then let me earn it, he said quickly, urgently, every day, every moment, no more lies, no more fear, just the truth, messy, painful, but real. You change me, Claire, and I don't want to go back to the man I was before you. I searched his face, desperate for deceit, for performance, but all I saw was a man stripped bare, broken but unashamed. The wind caught my tears, cold against my skin. I took a shuddering breath. I don't know how to love you again. His hand lifted, hesitated, then brushed against my cheek, warm against the chill. His voice was low, steady. Then let me show you. And in that moment, standing on the rooftop with the city sprawling below and the man I couldn't forget before me, I realized I wasn't ready to walk away. Not yet. The rooftop air was sharp with autumn, every gust a reminder that winter wasn't far behind. I stood there, his hand still cupping my cheek, the city sprawling below us like a universe of choices. One word from me, and this could end. One step away, and the wounds he left would scab over in time, leaving me scarred but intact. But my feet didn't move. Grant's eyes, those storm-gray eyes that had once terrified me with their coldness, were soft now, pleading, steady. He wasn't hiding behind contracts or power. He wasn't the ruthless billionaire from the headlines. He was just a man, broken and hopeful, waiting for my answer. I can't just forget what you did, I whispered, my voice tight. I'm not asking you to forget, he said quietly. I'm asking you to let me make it right. Every day, in the small ways, No promises I can't keep. No speeches polished for effect. Just me, showing up for you. I laughed bitterly through my tears. You always know the right words. He shook his head. Not this time. The right words don't exist, only the truth. And then he fell silent. He didn't try to fill the space with explanations or apologies. He didn't reach for me again, didn't push. He just stood there, his hands at his sides, his breath visible in the cold night air. The silence pressed in, my thoughts twisted and tangled. If I forgive him, will I survive another fall? If I walk away, will I ever stop wondering? The gallery's images flashed in my mind, my laugh, my hands, my silhouette against the skyline. He hadn't painted power or conquest. He had painted me, the real me. I remembered Maine the quiet mornings, the chipped mug of coffee, the empty bed. I had told myself that solitude was strength, that moving on meant survival. But, in truth, I had been living half a life, because some part of me had always belonged to him. Claire. His voice pulled me back, low and rough. I don't know how to be perfect, but I know how to love you, and if you let me, that's all I'll do. Tears spilled hot down my cheeks. My heart was screaming two different songs, one of fear, one of longing, and I didn't know which to follow. I stepped closer, my voice shook. If I give you this chance, if I trust you again, and you break me, I won't. He cut in, but gently, firmly, not because I'm flawless, not because life won't throw storms at us, but because I will not run again. I'll stand in the fire with you this time. That's my promise. I searched his face, desperate to find a crack, a lie, anything that would justify the walls I'd built. But all I saw was exhaustion, regret, and love so raw it hurt to look at. And then something inside me softened. Maybe it was the memory of his music echoing in the dark. Maybe it was the gallery filled with confessions in paint and charcoal. Maybe it was simply the truth that love, however flawed, was worth the risk. I exhaled shakily, my chest trembling. One chance? Grant, that's all. You prove it with actions, not words. Relief flooded his face, and for the first time in months, a smile, small, broken, but real, touched his lips. He reached for my hand, hesitant, and when I didn't pull away, his fingers laced through mine. I'll spend the rest of my life earning it, he whispered. And in that moment, as the city lights blinked beneath us and the wind carried away the last of my doubt, I chose love again. We didn't rush this time. When Grant led me away from the rooftop, there was no desperation in his steps, no urgency to claim what had nearly been lost. Instead, his hand rested lightly against the small of my back, steady and sure, as if reminding me with every touch I'm here. I'm not running. The penthouse was different than I remembered, softer somehow. Candles flickered across the living room, scattering pools of warm light against the cool glass walls. The city glittered outside, but in here, it felt like the world had paused. I hesitated just inside the doorway, my heart hammering. The last time I had stood here, it had ended in heartbreak. I had walked out carrying nothing but my bag and a wound so deep I thought it might never close. Grant turned to face me, his expression unreadable in the glow. If this feels wrong, he said quietly, tell me. I'll stop. I don't want tonight to be another storm. My throat tightened. And what do you want it to be? His gray eyes softened. A beginning. The word lingered in the air between us, fragile but strong enough to hold the weight of everything we'd lost. Slowly, I stepped toward him. My fingers brushed the lapel of his coat, tentative at first, then firmer. He didn't move, didn't push. He simply let me close the distance, his breath catching only when I rose onto my toes and pressed my lips softly against his. It was nothing like the stormy nights before. No urgency, no desperate hunger, just tenderness, just truth. His hand slid to my waist, gentle and steady, pulling me closer as if afraid I might vanish again. The kiss deepened, slow and reverent, every brush of his lips a promise he hadn't yet found words for. When we finally pulled apart, my forehead rested against his chest, his heartbeat thundering beneath my ear. "This feels different," I whispered. "Because it is," he murmured, his hand stroking my hair. "This isn't about losing control. It's about finding home." He led me to the bedroom, not with urgency, but with care, each step like a vow. The candles followed us, their soft glow trailing into the room. When he laid me on the bed, his movements were unhurried, his eyes never leaving mine. Every touch was deliberate, his fingers tracing the curve of my arm, the dip of my collarbone, the scar on my wrist I usually tried to hide. He didn't skip over it, he kissed it gently, reverently, as if to say, "I see all of you, and I love you still." I felt myself unravel in his hands, not with fire, but with warmth. My guard slipped away, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but truth. We whispered between kisses, small, fragile confessions. "I was afraid you'd forget me." I breathed, "Never," he whispered back. "You're in everything I do." The night stretched around us, not fierce but infinite. We moved together slowly, a rhythm not of hunger but of healing. His touch was an anchor, his presence a balm, and as the candles flickered low, I felt the fractures in my heart begin to mend. When it was over, we didn't collapse in exhaustion. We curled into each other, tangled in sheets and shadows. His arms wrapped around me as if he would never let go. For a long time, we lay in silence. His breath warmed the top of my head, steady and calm. My fingers traced idle patterns along his chest, memorizing the rise and fall beneath my touch. Finally, he spoke. "I don't deserve this," he murmured, "but I'll spend my life trying to." I tilted my head to meet his gaze. His eyes were tired, but no longer empty. They held hope, fragile but real. "You're right," I said softly. "You don't deserve me. But love isn't about deserving. It's about choosing." His breath caught, and I pressed a kiss against his jaw. "And tonight, I'm choosing you." He exhaled shakily, pulling me tighter against him, as if to fuse my body with his. Outside, the city hummed, but in here, it was quiet, peaceful, whole. For the first time in months, I felt safe, and I knew, whatever storms might come, this night would be our compass, not of passion's fire, but of love's steady flame. The morning light spilled into the penthouse, soft and golden, chasing away the shadows of the night. I stirred against the sheets, warm beneath Grant's arm, for the first time in what felt like forever. I didn't wake with dread pressing against my chest. I opened my eyes to see him watching me, his hair tousled, his expression unguarded. No mask, no armor, just Grant. The man who had built walls so high that even he had gotten lost behind them, now letting them crumble. "Morning," he whispered. "Morning," I whispered back, my voice still rough with sleep. For a long moment, we just looked at each other. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was full, like a promise. He brushed a strand of hair from my face, his touch feather light. "This feels different." "Because it is," I said, echoing his words from the night before. "We're not hiding anymore, not from ourselves, not from each other." His lips curved into the smallest smile, and it felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. We rose slowly, the day unfolding with a kind of ordinary intimacy I hadn't realized I craved. Coffee brewed in the kitchen, the rich aroma filling the air. I perched on the counter, wearing one of his shirts, my legs swinging idly as he moved around me. He handed me a mug, our fingers brushing, and the warmth of the porcelain seeped into my hands like an anchor. "This won't be easy," I said after a moment, my voice steady but thoughtful. He leaned against the counter beside me, his eyes fixed on mine. "No, it won't. The board will rage. The press will circle like sharks. People will talk, judge, assume. And yet," I said, sipping the coffee, "we'll face it." He nodded. "Together." It was such a simple word, but it carried the weight of everything we had been through: the exile, the doubt, the brokenness, and the fragile hope of what lay ahead. Later that morning, we walked through the city hand in hand. The air was brisk, autumn leaves scattering across the sidewalks. People turned their heads as we passed, some with recognition, some with curiosity. A few even whispered, Grant Whitmore, billionaire tech mogul, was not a man who blended into a crowd, and I, by his side, was no longer invisible. At first, my stomach clenched with nerves. The memory of that anonymous text haunted me, the whispers of being just another assistant. But Grant's hand tightened around mine, steady and sure, and the fear began to ebb. We weren't pretending anymore. When we stopped at a crosswalk, he turned to me, his gray eyes searching. If this gets too hard, if you ever feel like it's too much, promise me you'll tell me. We'll figure it out together. I squeezed his hand, meeting his gaze. And if you ever feel the urge to run again, promise me you won't. We'll face it, even if it burns. His jaw tightened, his eyes softening. I promise. We crossed the street, and it felt symbolic, somehow stepping together into the chaos, no longer retreating into shadows. That evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, we returned to the gallery. The doors were closed to the public, the walls still lined with pieces of me sketches, photographs, paintings. I stood in the center, looking at the final canvas again. Grant joined me, his hand brushing mine. I didn't know how to tell you what you meant to me, he said quietly, so I painted it. Every stroke was a prayer, every line a confession, but words matter too. So let me say them now. I turned to him, my throat tight. I love you, Claire Donovan. Not the assistant, not the secret, just you, always you. Tears filled my eyes, but this time they weren't born of sorrow. I love you too, I whispered. Even when I hated you, I loved you. He pulled me into his arms, and for a moment, the world outside the headlines, the boardroom battles, the judgment of strangers faded into silence. There was only us, standing in a gallery that wasn't just art, but testimony. As the city lights blinked awake, I realized something. Love wasn't about perfection, or control, or safety. It was about risk, about choosing to trust when every scar told you not to, about forgiving, not because it was easy, but because your heart couldn't bear not to. And that was what we were doing, choosing each other, again and again, no matter how the world watched, because true love, I had learned, wasn't about power or appearances. It was about courage, the courage to believe, to forgive, and to begin again. Claire and Grant's journey reminds us that true love is never simple, and life rarely offers easy choices. It is a story of courage, the courage to face past failures, to trust again after heartbreak, and to step into vulnerability despite the fear of being hurt. We learn that trust cannot be demanded. It must be built, nurtured, and earned over time. Equally, the story highlights the power of self-awareness and personal strength. Claire's resilience after failure, her commitment to rebuild her life, and her careful discernment of what and who was truly worthy of her love show that emotional maturity is as essential as passion in any relationship. For older audiences, this tale reinforces a timeless truth. It's never too late to embrace new beginnings, to forgive, or to allow oneself to be seen and loved fully. Love is not about perfection or control. It is about honesty, compassion, and the willingness to risk your heart. Life's storms may be unavoidable, but with courage, reflection, and a readiness to choose wisely, even the deepest wounds can lead to meaningful connections and lasting happiness. Thank you so much for joining us on Claire and Grant's journey. We hope their story touched your heart and reminded you of the courage it takes to trust, forgive, and love again. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Your support means the world and helps us bring more heartfelt stories to life.